My wife cheated on me with a lifeguard at sea because he saved her when she was drowning. I never thought I'd be one of those guys, airing my life out on the internet, but here we are. My name's Jack, I'm 32, and until last week, I thought my marriage to Rachel, 30, was solid. Sure, we had our little spats like any couple, but I honestly believed we had a partnership built on trust and mutual respect. Turns out I was wrong. So wrong. Let me set the scene. Rachel and I had taken a trip to Myrtle Beach to unwind after a crazy year. Work had been a grind for both of us. I'm in IT and she's a middle school teacher. This vacation was supposed to be about reconnection, relaxation, and forgetting for a while that bills, schedules, and life even existed. We checked into this cozy little resort right on the shore, with a balcony overlooking the waves. The first 2 days were bliss: sunbathing, day drinking, laughing at tourists doing cringe-worthy TikTok dances in the sand. Rachel and I were good. Or at least I thought we were. But everything changed on the third day. It was mid-afternoon, and the sun was blazing down. Rachel had just gotten into the water to cool off, and I decided to be the good husband and go grab us some water bottles from the little tiki-style snack hut by the boardwalk. The place was crowded, and it took longer than I'd expected. By the time I got back, the beach was buzzing with commotion. At first, I couldn't figure out what was going on. People were pointing toward the ocean, and I noticed a lifeguard sprinting past me, his whistle shrieking above the chatter. My stomach dropped. I followed the commotion down to the shoreline and froze. Rachel was in the water, struggling against the waves, her arms flailing wildly. My first thought was, this can't be happening. She's a decent swimmer, better than me, honestly, so how did this happen? Then I saw him. The lifeguard, some guy who looked like he'd been sculpted out of bronze and protein shakes, cutting through the water like a damn dolphin. In seconds, he reached Rachel, pulling her out of the surf with this dramatic, one-arm hold that had all the beachgoers clapping like they just witnessed a superhero in action. I rushed down to meet them as he laid Rachel in the sand, gently patting her shoulder and murmuring, "You're okay now, ma'am. Just take deep breaths." Rachel looked up at him like he'd hung the moon, her wet hair plastered to her face, her eyes wide and glassy with panic. "Thank you," she whispered between coughs. "You saved me." I crouched beside her, my heart still hammering from the sight of her struggling in the waves. "Rach, are you okay?" She barely looked at me, still clinging to the guy like he was the last lifeboat on the Titanic. I thought I was going to drown," she stammered. The lifeguard, whose name tag said Kyle, flashed a blinding white smile and said, "She's gonna be fine. Just a little shaken up. You did great out there," he added, giving her a wink. A wink. I thanked him, helped Rachel to her feet, and steered her back to our beach chairs. She was trembling, and I chalked it up to the adrenaline crash. But as we sat there, her eyes kept drifting back to the lifeguard stand where Kyle was perched like some Greek god surveying his domain. That evening, things didn't feel quite right. We were sitting on our hotel balcony, sipping the wine we picked up earlier, and Rachel kept bringing him up. "Did you see how fast Kyle got to me? He was so calm, even with all those waves," she said, her voice almost dreamy. "I don't know how he does it." I forced a smile and tried to brush it off. "Yeah, well, I guess that's why they pay him the big bucks." She gave me a look, one of those exasperated you don't get it looks. "Jack, he saved my life. That's not just a job, it's heroic." I wanted to tell her to stop fawning over him, but I bit my tongue. I mean, she just had a near-death experience, right? She was probably still shaken up, and this was her way of processing it. The rest of the night was quiet. Too quiet. Rachel went to bed early, saying she was exhausted, but I couldn't shake this weird feeling that something was off. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. After all, she'd just been through a terrifying ordeal. Of course she'd be thinking about it. The next morning, Rachel seemed back to normal. She suggested we hit the beach again, which I thought was a good sign. Maybe we could get back to enjoying our vacation. At one point, while we were lounging under our umbrella, Rachel said, Hey, I think I'm gonna go thank Kyle for yesterday. It's the least I can do after what he did for me. I glanced toward the lifeguard stand where Kyle was sitting, shirtless, with his sunglasses on. Something about the idea made me uneasy, but I didn't want to sound like a controlling jerk. Yeah, sure, I said, forcing a smile. That's a good idea. She grabbed her cover-up and walked over to him, her steps light and deliberate, like she was going to meet someone important. I watched as she talked to him, laughing at something he said. He leaned forward slightly, his hand resting on his knee, giving her his full attention. They talked for longer than I expected, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. When Rachel finally came back, she looked different. I can't explain it, but there was something in her expression that didn't sit right with me. What did he say? I asked, trying to sound casual. Oh, he was just so humble about the whole thing, she said with a shrug, but there was a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I told him I owed him a drink or something, but he said he was just doing his job. I let it go, but that unease stuck with me for the rest of the day. I wish I'd trusted my gut. If I had, maybe I could have stopped what happened next. The next day started off pretty normal, or at least, as normal as things could be when I was already feeling like a third wheel in my own marriage. Rachel woke up in a chipper mood, humming to herself as she got ready for breakfast. I tried to match her energy, but I couldn't shake the weird vibe from the day before when she'd spent 15 minutes chatting up Kyle, the lifeguard. Let's make today a good one, she said over coffee, flashing me the smile that used to light up my world. No stress, no drama, just fun. I nodded, forcing a grin. Sounds good to me. We hit the beach again, and for a while, it felt like we were back to normal. We splashed around in the water, built a ridiculous sandcastle that immediately collapsed, and even shared some laughs over how awful our beach selfies turned out. But then Rachel dropped a bombshell. I was thinking, she said, brushing sand off her legs. I want to thank Kyle properly for what he did. Like, not just a quick thanks on the beach. I mean really thank him. I frowned. What does that mean? You already thanked him yesterday. She waved me off like I was missing the point. I mean, I want to get him a little something, a gift. You know, to show my gratitude. It's not every day someone saves your life. I hesitated. On the one hand, it sounded innocent enough. On the other hand, something about it felt extra. Like she was making this a bigger deal than it needed to be. Still, I didn't want to come across as the insecure husband. Okay, I said slowly. What kind of gift are we talking about? Oh, I don't know. Maybe a nice bottle of wine or a gift card to somewhere cool. She shrugged, but her tone was a little too casual, like she'd already thought this through. I'll just swing by a shop in town later. All right, I said, trying not to let my irritation show. Want me to come with you? She hesitated, then shook her head. Nah, you don't have to. I can handle it. Something about the way she said it made my stomach twist, but I let it go. Maybe I was overthinking things. Rachel left the beach in the early afternoon, saying she wanted to beat the crowds downtown. I stayed behind, lounging under our umbrella and trying to enjoy the sun. But as the hours ticked by, I started to get restless. She'd been gone for almost 3 hours, which seemed excessive for picking out a thank you gift. I texted her. Me, hey, everything alright? You've been gone a while. Rachel, yeah, just lost track of time. Be back soon. When she finally returned, she was glowing. Not just from the sun, but in this way that made my chest tighten. She didn't have a gift bag or anything with her, which immediately set off alarm bells. Did you find something for Kyle? I asked, keeping my tone light. Oh, I decided against it, she said breezily, plopping down on her chair and slipping her sunglasses on. I figured he wouldn't want me to make a big deal out of it. Her explanation didn't sit right with me, but I forced a nod and didn't press her. At least, not then. That night, things got even stranger. Rachel was glued to her phone, smiling at something on the screen and quickly locking it whenever I got too close. I couldn't help but ask, "What's so funny?" "Just a meme," she said, not looking up. I tried to brush it off, but the uneasy feeling in my gut was growing by the second. Something wasn't adding up. The next day, I decided to follow my instincts. While Rachel was in the shower, I checked her phone. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd do, but my gut was screaming at me that something was wrong. Sure enough, there it was. A text thread with Kyle. At first, it seemed innocent, just a thank you for saving her, followed by a few casual messages about the beach. But as I scrolled further, my heart sank. Kyle, you're seriously stunning, Rachel. I haven't stopped thinking about you since yesterday. Rachel, stop it. You're gonna make me blush, winky face. Kyle, I mean it. I'd love to see you again, off the clock. Rachel, maybe. If I can sneak away. I felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. Sneak away? What the hell was going on? My hands were shaking as I kept scrolling, and that's when I saw it, a message from Rachel sent just a couple of hours before. Rachel, thanks for today. You're amazing. Let's do it again soon. And then a picture, a selfie she'd taken in her sundress, smiling in a way that wasn't meant for me. I put the phone down and sat there stunned. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Had she met up with him while she was shopping for a gift? Was this just harmless flirting, or was it something more? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my gut told me I already knew the answer. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at her phone and trying to convince myself I was misinterpreting things. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it looked. Maybe "let's do it again soon" meant something innocent. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. When Rachel came out of the shower, wrapped in a towel and humming a tune, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Rachel, we need to talk. She froze, her expression quickly shifting from carefree to cautious. About what? She asked, her voice tight. I held up her phone, the screen still displaying her chat with Kyle. This. Her face went pale. She stared at the phone like it was a ticking time bomb. You went through my phone? She snapped, her tone immediately defensive. That's such an invasion of privacy, Jack. I ignored her attempt to deflect. I don't care about privacy right now, Rachel. Who is Kyle to you? And don't give me the he saved my life speech again. I want the truth. She crossed her arms, glaring at me. You're overreacting. He's just a friend. We were texting, that's all. I was thanking him for what he did. I scoffed. A friend? You don't call a friend amazing and say let's do it again soon. What exactly are you planning to do with him, Rachel? Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might come clean. But instead, she doubled down. It's nothing, Jack. You're blowing this way out of proportion. I can't believe you're accusing me of something like this. I could feel my anger rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. If it's nothing, then why did you spend hours shopping yesterday with no gift to show for it? And why are you hiding your phone from me? Her eyes darted away, and she muttered. I told you, I didn't want to make a big deal out of thanking him. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Rachel, I saw the messages. All of them. Do you really think I'm that stupid? Her head snapped up, and for a split second, I saw panic in her eyes. Then she switched tactics. Fine, she said, her voice sharp. Yes, I met up with him yesterday. But it was just to talk. I felt bad about what happened at the beach, and I wanted to make sure he knew how grateful I was. Grateful enough to send him a selfie? Grateful enough to plan to see him again? My voice cracked, the betrayal cutting deeper with every word. Just admit it, Rachel. Did you sleep with him? Her silence was deafening. Rachel, I said, my voice trembling. Answer me. She finally looked up at me, and her face twisted into a defensive sneer. All right, fine. Yes, I slept with him. Are you happy now? Is that what you wanted to hear? It felt like the world stopped spinning. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. How could you do this to me? I whispered. She rolled her eyes like I was the one being unreasonable. You don't get it, Jack. You weren't there. You don't know what it felt like to think I was going to die, and then this amazing guy comes along and saves me. I don't know. I felt a connection. A connection? I repeated, my voice rising. You've known him for 2 days. We've been married for 5 years, Rachel. I've been there for you through everything, and you threw it all away for some guy who happened to pull you out of the water? You don't understand, she snapped. You've been so distant lately, always wrapped up in work. Kyle actually listened to me. He made me feel alive in a way you haven't in years. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. I stared at her, trying to process what she just said. So this is my fault now? I asked, my voice low and shaking. I've been working hard to provide for us, to make sure we have a good life, and you're telling me that justifies cheating on me? She crossed her arms again, her lips pressed into a thin line. I'm not saying it's your fault, but maybe if you'd paid more attention to me, this wouldn't have happened. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman I'd built my life with, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was standing there blaming me for her infidelity. I took a step back, suddenly feeling like I couldn't be in the same room as her. I need some air, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jack, wait. She started, but I held up a hand to stop her. Don't. Just don't. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, my head spinning and my heart in pieces. I walked aimlessly along the boardwalk, the sounds of the ocean and distant laughter doing nothing to drown out the storm in my head. My chest felt hollow, like Rachel's confession had ripped something vital out of me. I replayed her words over and over, each one hitting like a fresh punch to the gut. She made me feel alive. If you'd paid more attention. Was I really that bad of a husband? Had I missed something so important that it drove her into the arms of a stranger? No, not just a stranger, a lifeguard she'd known for 2 days. I stopped at a bench near the edge of the beach and dropped down, staring out at the waves crashing against the shore. The same waves that Kyle had pulled her from. I should have been grateful he saved her, and I was, until he took what wasn't his to take. My hands trembled as anger bubbled up, threatening to take over. How could she justify what she did? How could she look me in the eye and make it sound like her betrayal was my fault? My mind raced between heartbreak and fury, either giving me any peace. A part of me wanted to storm back to the hotel, pack my things, and leave her there to deal with the mess she'd made. But another part, the part that had loved her for years, wanted to go back and scream at her until she realized the depth of what she'd done. Instead, I sat there for what felt like hours, my thoughts spinning in circles. I didn't know what to do, what to say, or how to move forward. All I knew was that I couldn't stay like this, paralyzed and broken. Eventually, I pulled out my phone and texted my best friend, Ethan. Me, you busy? It didn't take long for him to reply. Ethan, not really. What's up? Me, Rachel cheated on me. I stared at the screen, feeling a strange sense of relief as soon as I hit send. Saying it out loud, well, writing it, made it feel real, like I wasn't just stuck in a nightmare. Ethan's response came almost instantly. Ethan, what? Dude, are you serious? Me, yeah? With a lifeguard at the beach. Long story. I don't know what to do. Ethan called me instead of texting back. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering, holding the phone to my ear. Jack, what the hell is going on? He asked, his voice filled with concern. I took a deep breath and explained everything. Rachel's near drowning, Kyle the lifeguard, her gratitude, and the text I found. By the time I finished, Ethan was silent for a moment. Man, he finally said. I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say. That's brutal. Yeah, I muttered. It is. You need to get out of there, he said firmly. Pack your stuff, come home, and figure this out from a distance. You can't stay in the same room with her after that. I thought about that, I admitted. But it feels so final, you know? Like if I leave, that's it. The marriage is over. Is that a bad thing? Ethan asked gently. I mean, she cheated, Jack. She didn't just make a mistake, she made a choice. And she tried to blame it on you. His words stung because they were true. I rubbed my temples, trying to think clearly. I don't know if I'm ready to make that call yet. All right, Ethan said after a pause. Then at least set some boundaries. Don't let her gaslight you into thinking this is your fault. She's the one who broke the trust, not you. We talked for a little while longer, and by the time I hung up, I felt slightly more grounded. Not better, there was no way I could feel better, but at least I wasn't spiraling. When I finally made my way back to the hotel, the tension was suffocating. Rachel was sitting on the edge of the bed, her phone in her lap, looking like she'd been waiting for me. Jack, she started, her voice soft. I held up a hand. Not now, Rachel. I'm not ready to talk. She opened her mouth to argue but then shut it, nodding silently. I grabbed a pillow and a blanket from the closet and headed for the couch. I couldn't bear to sleep next to her, not after everything. As I settled into the two small cushions, I stared at the dark ceiling, wondering if I'd ever feel normal again. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My neck was stiff from the couch, and my mind was still replaying everything Rachel had said and done. She was already up, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee in her hands. When she noticed I was awake, she turned to me, her expression a mix of guilt and defiance. We need to talk, Jack. I groaned inwardly. I wasn't ready for another round, but I knew we couldn't avoid this conversation forever. Fine, I said, sitting up and rubbing the sleep from my eyes. She set her coffee down and crossed her arms. I know I messed up, she began. I should have been honest with you, and I shouldn't have let things go as far as they did. That's the understatement of the year, I muttered. Her eyes narrowed. I'm trying to take responsibility here, Jack. Can you at least let me explain? Explain what? I shot back. That you slept with some guy you've known for 2 days? That you blamed me for it, like I somehow drove you to cheat? She flinched but didn't back down. You don't get it. I felt like I was drowning long before Cobb pulled me out of the water. You're always so focused on work, on paying bills, on being responsible, but you've completely checked out emotionally. I've felt invisible for months. Her words hit like a slap. Part of me wanted to defend myself, to point out all the ways I'd been trying to provide for us, but another part of me, the part that had been lying awake at night questioning everything, couldn't deny there was some truth to what she was saying. That's not an excuse, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. If you were unhappy, you should have talked to me. You don't fix a marriage by destroying it. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. I know I screwed up, okay? I don't know how it got this far. I didn't plan for it to happen. Rachel, I said, locking eyes with her. Be honest with me. Was it just the one time? She hesitated, and my stomach dropped. Yes, she said eventually, but her tone lacked conviction. I stared at her, searching for any sign she was telling the truth. I want to believe you, I said slowly. But how can I? You've lied to me this whole time. How do I know this isn't just another lie? She didn't have an answer for that, and the silence between us stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Finally, I stood up. I need time to think, I said. Her eyes widened. What does that mean? Are you leaving? I don't know, I admitted. But I can't make any decisions while I'm stuck here with you, surrounded by this. I gestured around the room, the place where we'd spent the past few days living a lie. I'll give you space, she said quickly. You can stay here, and I'll go stay with a friend or something. The offer surprised me, but I nodded. That's probably for the best. She packed a small bag and left within the hour, giving me the room, and the quiet I desperately needed. That evening, I found myself sitting on the balcony, staring at the waves and replaying Ethan's words in my head. She made a choice, Jack. Don't let her put this on you. But it wasn't that simple. I kept thinking about what Rachel had said, how she'd felt invisible, how she'd been drowning emotionally long before she cheated. Was that my fault? Had I really failed her as a husband? I tried to sort through my feelings, but it felt like trying to untangle a ball of string while wearing boxing gloves. Anger, sadness, confusion, they all blurred together, making it impossible to think clearly. Finally, I did the only thing I could think of. I called my dad. He's old school, the kind of guy who doesn't sugarcoat anything, and I knew he'd give it to me straight. "Hey, Dad," I said when he picked up. "Jack? What's going on? You sound off." I took a deep breath. Rachel cheated on me. There was a long pause on the other end. "What?" he said finally, his voice low. I told him everything, from the lifeguard saving her to the text I'd found and the fight we'd had that morning. When I was done, he let out a long sigh. "I'm sorry, son. That's a tough one," he said. "But you've got to ask yourself something. Can you ever trust her again? Because without trust, there's no marriage. Doesn't matter how much love there is, if you don't have trust, you've got nothing." I let his words sink in, staring at the horizon as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Could I trust Rachel again? Did I even want to? I sat on that balcony for hours after hanging up with my dad. His words kept playing in my mind like a broken record. Without trust, there's no marriage. He was right, of course. But knowing that didn't make things any easier. I tried to imagine what life would look like if I stayed with Rachel. Would I spend the rest of my life second-guessing her every move? Wondering if every late-night text or sudden plan was something sinister? That wasn't a life, it was a slow death of my sanity. But the alternative wasn't much better. Walking away would mean ending 5 years of marriage, uprooting the life we'd built together. And despite everything, a small part of me still loved her, still clung to the hope that maybe, somehow, we could fix this. I needed clarity. A way to sort through the noise in my head and figure out what I wanted. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I went for a run. It wasn't something I'd planned. I just threw on my sneakers, grabbed my headphones, and started running down the beach. The rhythm of my feet hitting the sand, the sound of waves crashing, and the crisp evening air, it all helped quiet my thoughts. As I ran, I started asking myself the hard questions. Could I forgive Rachel? Could I rebuild trust with someone who had broken it so completely? And even if I could forgive her, did I want to? By the time I got back to the hotel, I didn't have all the answers, but I had one. I couldn't rush this decision. I needed time, real time, to figure out what was best for me. The next morning, Rachel texted me. "Rachel, can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I'm not ready." She didn't push, which I appreciated. For the rest of the day, I tried to focus on myself. I went for another run, grabbed lunch at a small cafe by the boardwalk, and even stopped at a local shop to buy some souvenirs for my nephews. For the first time in days, I felt a small flicker of control returning to my life. But as the day wore on, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. Rachel had cheated on me, and while I was furious with her, I also knew that I'd played a part in our problems. I wasn't excusing what she'd done, far from it, but I couldn't deny that I'd let work consume me, that I'd stopped paying attention to the little things that had once made our relationship strong. That evening, I sat down and wrote a list. It wasn't anything fancy, just a piece of hotel stationery with 2 columns, reasons to stay and reasons to leave. Under reasons to stay, I wrote, "I still love her. We have history. She seems genuinely sorry." Under reasons to leave, I wrote, "She cheated. She lied and blamed me. I don't know if I can trust her again." Seeing it all laid out in black and white didn't make the decision any easier, but it helped me realize just how complicated this situation was. The next day, I called Ethan again. "I'm still stuck," I admitted, pacing the length of the balcony. "I don't know what to do." "Have you thought about counseling?" he asked. "Counseling?" I repeated, unsure. "Yeah, like couples counseling," Ethan said. "Look, I'm not saying you have to forgive her or stay with her, but maybe it would help to talk things out with a professional. If nothing else, it might give you some clarity." It wasn't a bad idea. I told Ethan I'd think about it, and hung up. Then, After staring at Rachel's number on my phone for a good 5 minutes, I called her. "Jack?" she answered, her voice uncertain. "We need to talk," I said. "But not here. Not now. I want to see a counselor, together. If you're serious about fixing this, that's the only way I'm willing to even consider it." There was a long pause before she said, "Okay. I'll do it. Whatever it takes." Her willingness surprised me, but I wasn't ready to let my guard down. "Don't think this means I've forgiven you," I said. "I haven't. But if there's even a chance we can fix this, I need to understand what went wrong, and I need to hear it from someone who isn't you." "I understand," she said quietly. "Thank you for giving me a chance." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "This isn't about you. It's about me figuring out what I can live with, and what I can't." That night, I felt a small sense of relief. Not because things were fixed, they were far from it, but because I finally had a plan. I didn't know where this path would lead, but at least I wasn't standing still anymore. The next week felt like a blur. Rachel moved back into the house, but we kept our interactions minimal. She stayed in the guest room, and I avoided her as much as possible. It wasn't out of spite, I just couldn't look at her without feeling the weight of everything she'd done. True to her word, Rachel found a counselor, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Ellis who specialized in marriage therapy. We scheduled our first session for the following Tuesday. I wasn't exactly thrilled about sitting in a room with Rachel, baring our souls to a stranger, but I knew we needed a neutral party to make any sense of this mess. When the day finally came, I felt like a bundle of nerves. As we drove to the office, the silence in the car was deafening. Rachel kept glancing at me like she wanted to say something, but I stared straight ahead, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing anchoring me. The waiting room was cozy, with soft lighting and soothing music that only made me feel more tense. Rachel sat beside me, fidgeting with her hands, while I tried to focus on anything but the awkwardness between us. "Jack and Rachel?" a voice called out. We stood up, and a kind-looking woman with glasses and a calming smile greeted us. "I'm Dr. Ellis. Come on in." Her office was warm and inviting, with plush chairs and a view of a garden outside the window. As we sat down, Dr. Ellis gave us a moment to settle before speaking. "I understand this is a difficult time for both of you," she said gently. "Before we dive in, I want to make one thing clear: this is a safe space. My job isn't to take sides but to help you communicate and figure out what you both want moving forward." Does that sound fair? We both nodded, though I could feel Rachel stiffen beside me. "Good," Dr. Ellis said. "Jack, since you scheduled the appointment, would you like to start by sharing what brought you here?" I took a deep breath, my hands gripping my knees. "Rachel cheated on me," I said bluntly. The words felt heavy, but also strangely freeing. She had an affair with a lifeguard while we were on vacation. I found out through her texts. Dr. Ellis nodded, her expression neutral. "Thank you for being honest. Rachel, how do you feel hearing Jack say that?" Rachel looked down at her hands, her face flushed. "Ashamed," she admitted. "I hate what I did. I hate how much I've hurt him." "Why did you do it?" I blurted out, my voice sharper than I intended. "I need to know, Rachel. Was it about him? Or was it about me?" Rachel flinched but didn't look away. "It wasn't about him," she said quietly. "Kyle was convenient. He paid attention to me at a time when I felt invisible. But it was never really about him, it was about how I felt. Lonely. Unseen. Like I didn't matter." Her words stung, but Dr. Ellis stepped in before I could respond. "Jack, how does that make you feel?" "Angry," I said honestly. Because if she felt that way, she should have told me. Instead, she went behind my back and ruined everything. Dr. Ellis nodded. "That anger is valid. Betrayal cuts deep, and it's normal to feel hurt and resentful. Rachel, can you see how your actions might make Jack feel like he wasn't given a chance to address those issues before they escalated?" "Yes," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "I know I handled it all wrong. I should have talked to him instead of running to someone else. But at the time, I felt so trapped. I didn't think he'd listen. I scoffed. You didn't even try. Dr. Ellis raised a hand to pause the argument. Let's focus on the present. Jack, you're here because you're trying to decide if this marriage is worth saving. Rachel, you're here because you want to rebuild the trust you broke. Is that accurate? We both nodded, though my agreement felt more tentative than hers. Then here's what I recommend, Dr. Ellis said. For the next few sessions, I want us to focus on open communication. No defensiveness, no blame shifting, just honesty. It might get uncomfortable, but if you want to move forward, you need to be willing to face the hard truths. The session left me emotionally drained but also slightly hopeful. For the first time, it felt like we were actually addressing the root of our problems instead of just reacting to the fallout. Over the next few weeks, we kept going to therapy. Some sessions were brutal. Rachel's explanations felt like knives cutting deeper into old wounds, but others felt productive, like we were slowly peeling back the layers of our broken relationship. I learned things I didn't want to hear, like how Rachel had been feeling neglected for years, and how she'd convinced herself that I didn't love her anymore. She learned how deeply her betrayal had shaken me, and how much work it would take to even begin rebuilding trust. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't pretty. But it was progress. Therapy was a strange mix of pain and hope. Some sessions felt like we were finally making progress, like we were untangling years of miscommunication and unmet expectations. Other sessions felt like we were tearing open fresh wounds, leaving me more uncertain than ever about whether our marriage could, or should, be saved. One Tuesday evening, after a particularly grueling session, Rachel and I sat in the car in silence. Dr. Ellis had asked us to reflect on a painful truth. Rachel's betrayal wasn't just a one-time mistake. It was a symptom of deeper problems in our marriage, problems we both contributed to, even if her actions were ultimately her responsibility. Do you think we can ever go back to the way things were? Rachel asked softly, breaking the silence. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I don't know, I admitted. And honestly, I don't think we should. The way things were wasn't working. That's how we got here. Her eyes filled with tears, and for once, I didn't feel the usual pang of sympathy. I was too emotionally exhausted to comfort her. I'm trying, Jack, she said, her voice trembling. I don't know how to prove it to you, but I'll do whatever it takes. I nodded but didn't say anything. Words meant nothing to me at this point. I needed to see action. The next few weeks were a roller coaster. Rachel seemed genuinely committed to repairing the damage. She deleted Kyle's contact information in front of me, quit social media, and gave me full access to her phone and email without hesitation. She even started planning weekly date nights, something we hadn't done in years. But for every step forward, there seemed to be a setback. One Friday night, I overheard her talking on the phone. Her voice was low, almost whispery, and my stomach churned. I waited until she hung up before confronting her. Who were you talking to? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She looked startled but quickly recovered. My mom, she said. Why were you whispering? She was asking about us, and I didn't want to wake you, she said with a forced smile. It sounded plausible, but my gut told me something was off. The paranoia was eating me alive. I didn't want to be the kind of husband who interrogated his wife over every phone call, but after what she'd done, how could I not? The biggest setback came a month into therapy. Rachel was making dinner while I was in the living room flipping through channels. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and I glanced over out of habit. The message preview read, "Hey, it's been hard not talking to you. Can we meet?" My blood ran cold. I picked up the phone, my hands trembling, and unlocked it. The message was from an unsaved number, but the tone was all too familiar. Rachel, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. She turned around, her face going pale when she saw me holding her phone. Jack, I can explain, she said quickly. Explain what? I snapped, holding up the screen. That he's still trying to contact you. That you haven't told me he's reaching out? I didn't respond, she said, her voice rising. I blocked him the first time he tried to contact me, but I guess he's using a new number. Why didn't you tell me this was happening? Because I knew it would upset you, she said, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't want to make things worse. Do you even hear yourself? I said, my voice shaking. You're keeping secrets again, Rachel. That's exactly how we got here in the first place. She broke down, sobbing, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Instead, I walked out of the house, slamming the door behind me. That night, I stayed at a friend's place, sleeping on his couch and staring at the ceiling. The trust we were trying to rebuild was still so fragile, and it felt like it had just been shattered all over again. I wanted to believe Rachel was telling the truth, that she hadn't responded to Kyle's messages. But how could I trust her? When I came home the next morning, Rachel was waiting for me, her face blotchy from crying. I'm sorry, she said as soon as I walked in. I should have told you. I swear I'm not hiding anything else. Please, Jack, don't give up on us. I nodded stiffly. I'm not giving up. But I can't go through this again, Rachel. If there's even a hint of dishonesty from you moving forward, I'm done. I understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We brought up the incident in therapy, and Dr. Ellis helped us unpack why Rachel hadn't told me about Kyle's message. Fear of conflict is a common reason people keep secrets, she explained. But secrecy only breeds mistrust, which leads to more conflict in the long run. Rachel, you need to prioritize transparency, even when it's uncomfortable. Rachel nodded, looking ashamed. I'll do better, she promised. But I wasn't sure how many more promises I could take. Things felt different after the incident with Kyle's message. The fragile thread holding our marriage together seemed thinner, more frayed. Rachel was trying. I couldn't deny that. She went out of her way to be transparent, checking in with me constantly, and sharing even the smallest details of her day. But every time she looked at her phone, a part of me tensed, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Therapy sessions became more intense. Dr. Ellis began asking the hard questions, forcing us to confront the deeper cracks in our relationship. Jack, she said one evening, have you thought about what forgiveness looks like for you? Not for Rachel, but for you. I hesitated, not knowing how to answer. I don't know, I admitted. I mean, I want to forgive her, at least I think I do. But every time I try, I get stuck. Stuck how? She asked. I keep thinking about what she did, I said, my voice tightening. How she betrayed me, how she tried to blame me. And then I wonder, what's stopping her from doing it again the next time things get hard? Rachel flinched, but she didn't interrupt. That's a valid fear, Dr. Ellis said. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the betrayal didn't happen. It's about deciding whether you're willing to let go of the resentment and rebuild. That can happen if the person who hurt you hasn't taken full accountability. She turned to Rachel. Have you taken accountability, Rachel? Rachel nodded, her voice trembling. I've tried. I've admitted what I did, and I've apologized over and over. I know it'll take time for Jack to trust me again, but I'm not giving up. Her words sounded sincere, but sincerity wasn't enough for me anymore. One weekend I decided to spend some time alone. I told Rachel I needed space, and to her credit, she didn't argue. I packed a small bag and drove to a cabin a couple of hours away, a place I'd rented a few times in the past for fishing trips with Ethan. Sitting by the lake with nothing but the sound of water lapping against the shore gave me the clarity I hadn't been able to find in weeks. I thought about the life Rachel and I had built, the good times and the bad. I thought about the person she'd been when we first fell in love, kind, passionate, funny. The Rachel who cheated on me with Kyle didn't feel like the same person. But then I asked myself a harder question. Was I the same person she married? The truth was, I wasn't. Somewhere along the way, I'd let the stress of work and life consume me. I'd stopped noticing the little things Rachel did to make our house a home, the small ways she tried to connect with me. I wasn't excusing her betrayal, but I couldn't pretend I was blameless either. When I came back from the cabin, Rachel was waiting for me in the living room. She looked nervous, like she wasn't sure if I was coming home to stay or to pack my bags. "How was your trip?" she asked cautiously. "Good," I said, setting my bag down. She nodded, wringing her hands. "I know you probably need more time, but I just want to say again how sorry I am. For everything." "I know," I said, sitting down across from her. "And I believe you mean it." Her eyes widened slightly, like she wasn't expecting that. "But believing you're sorry doesn't mean I know if we can fix this," I continued. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about whether this marriage can survive. And honestly, I'm still not sure." Tears welled in her eyes, but she stayed quiet, letting me speak. "I want to try," I said finally. "But I need to be clear about something. This is your last chance, Rachel. If there's even a hint of dishonesty or disrespect moving forward, I'm done. No second chances, no explanations, just done." "I understand," she said, her voice shaking. "And I promise you, Jack, I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild what I broke." We shared this tentative, fragile moment of understanding, but it felt more like standing at a crossroads than crossing a finish line. I still wasn't sure where the road would lead, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a direction. Rachel and I began what felt like the slowest crawl toward recovery. It wasn't some Hollywood-style montage of romantic gestures and tearful apologies that magically made everything okay. It was messy, uncomfortable, and at times, exhausting. For every step forward, there was always the chance we'd stumble. I knew that, and I think Rachel did too. But if we were going to make this work, we both had to commit to the process, no matter how painful it got. The first step was setting boundaries, hard ones. "From now on," I told her during one of our late-night talks, "I need complete transparency. That means no secrets, no private conversations I don't know about. If anyone, from your past tries to contact you, you tell me immediately." Rachel nodded, her expression serious. "I understand. And I'll do it." I handed her my phone. "Here. Put Kyle's number in my contacts so if he ever tries to call or text again, I'll know." The tension in the room was palpable as she typed his number into my phone. "Done," she said quietly, handing it back to me. It felt like a small victory, but it was a start. We also agreed to keep attending therapy with Dr. Ellis. Some sessions focused on rebuilding trust, while others dug deeper into the cracks in our relationship that had existed long before Kyle entered the picture. One session in particular hit me hard. "Jack," Dr. Ellis said, leaning forward slightly, "can you think of a time when you felt Rachel was reaching out to you emotionally, but you didn't respond?" The question made me uncomfortable, but I forced myself to think about it. Slowly, a memory surfaced. "There was this one time," I said, hesitating. "She wanted to plan a weekend getaway, just the two of us. But I was swamped at work, and I told her it wasn't a good time. I figured we could just do it later." Rachel glanced at me, her eyes glistening. "That wasn't just a weekend, Jack. It was supposed to be our anniversary trip." My stomach sank. I'd completely forgotten. "That's not an excuse for what I did," Rachel said softly. "But moments like that made me feel unimportant. Like I didn't matter as much as your job." It was a gut punch, but I knew she was right. I'd been so focused on providing for us financially that I'd neglected the emotional part of our relationship. That didn't excuse her actions, but it was a painful reminder that I wasn't blameless in how we got here. At home, things were tentative. Rachel went out of her way to show she was committed to earning back my trust. She'd check in with me throughout the day, asking how I was feeling or if there was anything she could do to help. But trust isn't something you can force, and it wasn't something I could give her overnight. I still found myself questioning her motives, wondering if her kindness was genuine or just a way to smooth things over. One night, as we were cleaning up after dinner, I finally voiced my doubts. "Sometimes I feel like you're only trying so hard because you're scared of losing me," I admitted. "Not because you actually regret what you did." Rachel set down the dish she was rinsing and turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. Jack, I'll admit I'm scared. I'm terrified, actually. But that doesn't mean I don't regret what I did. I do, every single day. I hate that I hurt you. I hate that I broke the trust we had. But I love you, and I'll keep trying, even if it takes the rest of my life to prove it. Her words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time, I saw not just guilt, but genuine remorse. The next morning, Rachel handed me a letter. What's this? I asked, eyeing the envelope. It's everything, she said hesitantly. How I felt before, during, and after what happened. I know it's hard for you to believe me when we're talking face to face, so I thought maybe writing it down would help. I nodded, unsure of what to say. Later that day, when I was alone, I opened the letter and began reading. It wasn't easy to get through. She detailed her feelings of loneliness, the growing distance between us, and how Kyle had been a distraction from her pain. But what struck me most was the part where she talked about her guilt. I thought I could justify what I did by blaming you, she wrote. But the truth is, I made a choice, a selfish, hurtful choice that I'll regret for the rest of my life. You didn't deserve this, Jack. You deserve better, and I want to be better for you. I folded the letter and set it aside, feeling a strange mix of emotions. It didn't erase the hurt, but it gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild. Progress wasn't linear. Some days felt like we were taking huge strides forward, while others felt like we were right back at square one. But slowly, I started to see glimpses of the Rachel I'd fallen in love with, the one who laughed at my terrible jokes and danced around the kitchen while making pancakes. And for the first time in a long time, I started to feel like myself again too. The weeks that followed felt like cautiously stepping onto a frozen lake, testing every step for cracks. Rachel and I were making progress, slow, tentative progress, but trust was still an uphill battle. Our therapist, Dr. Ellis, suggested we start spending more intentional time together, doing things that reminded us of the early days of our relationship. It wasn't about pretending the affair never happened, it was about finding common ground in the midst of the chaos. One Friday evening, Rachel suggested we go out for dinner. It doesn't have to be fancy, she said quickly, as though sensing my hesitation. I just thought it might be nice to get out of the house for a change. I agreed, albeit reluctantly. It wasn't that I didn't want to spend time with her, it was that every interaction felt loaded, like there was a giant elephant in the room we couldn't ignore. We ended up at this little Italian place downtown, the kind of cozy restaurant with candlelit tables and soft music in the background. As we sat across from each other, I couldn't help but feel like we were on a first date. So, Rachel said, fiddling with her napkin. How's work been? It's fine, I replied. Busy as usual. She nodded, looking unsure of what to say next. The silence between us was heavy, but not entirely uncomfortable. It was tentative, like we were both waiting to see where the conversation would go. I know this feels weird, Rachel admitted after a while. And I know I'm the reason it feels weird. But I just want to say thank you for giving me the chance to fix this. I nodded, taking a sip of my water. I'm trying, I said honestly. But it's hard. Some days I feel like we're moving forward. Other days it feels like I'm stuck in a loop, replaying everything in my head. Her eyes softened. I get that. And I don't expect you to just get over it. I know it'll take time, probably more time than either of us wants, but I'm willing to wait. The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. For the first time, I saw a flicker of the woman I'd fallen in love with, the one who used to laugh at my bad jokes and always insisted on taking the scenic route home. We spent the rest of the evening talking, not about the affair, but about lighter things. We reminisced about our early years together, laughed about the time we got lost on a hiking trail and ended up at a stranger's barbecue, and even debated whether pineapple belonged on pizza. It doesn't, by the way. By the time we left the restaurant, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. It wasn't a magical fix, but it was a step in the right direction. The next test came when Rachel suggested we spend a weekend away together. Just the two of us, she said. No distractions, no phones, just time to reconnect. The idea made me nervous. Spending a weekend alone with her, without the buffer of daily routines or distractions, felt daunting. But Dr. Ellis had encouraged us to focus on rebuilding our connection, so I agreed. We booked a small cabin in the mountains, far enough from the city to feel like an escape but close enough that we could leave if things went south. The first night was awkward. We played a game of Scrabble by the fire, but every conversation felt forced, like we were tiptoeing around the elephant in the room. I know this isn't easy, Rachel said, setting down her tiles. But I'm glad we're here. Even if it's weird. I gave her a small smile. Yeah. Me too. The next day, things started to feel a little more natural. We went hiking, exploring trails that wound through the forest and led to a stunning overlook. At one point, Rachel slipped on a patch of loose gravel, and I instinctively reached out to steady her. Still saving me, she said with a sheepish smile. Old habits die hard, I replied, and for a moment, we both laughed. By the time we got back to the cabin that evening, I realized something surprising. I wasn't as angry as I used to be. The hurt was still there, lingering beneath the surface, but it didn't feel as all-consuming. That night, as we sat by the fire sipping hot chocolate, Rachel looked over at me and said, "Thank you for coming here with me. I know I've given you a million reasons to walk away, but I hope you know how much this means to me." I didn't say anything right away, letting her words sink in. Finally I said, "I'm here because I want to see if we can make this work. But I need you to understand something. I'm not here because I'm over what happened. I don't know if I'll ever be completely over it. But I'm trying, and that has to count for something." "It does," she said softly. The weekend wasn't perfect, but it felt like progress. For the first time, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to something resembling normalcy. It wouldn't be the same as before, but maybe it didn't have to be. After the cabin trip, something shifted between Rachel and me. It wasn't like the pain of her betrayal magically disappeared, but the walls between us didn't feel as impenetrable. For the first time in months, I started to feel like we were on the same team again. That feeling was tested one evening when we were cleaning up after dinner. Rachel was drying dishes while I wiped down the counter, and out of nowhere she said, "Jack, I need to tell you something." My chest tightened immediately. The last time she'd started a conversation like that, my life had fallen apart. I turned to face her, my jaw clenched. "What is it?" She set down the towel, her hands trembling slightly. "Kyle tried to contact me again." My heart dropped. "What?" She nodded quickly, her voice shaking. "He sent me a message yesterday. It wasn't anything inappropriate. He just said he wanted to check in. I blocked the number immediately and deleted the message, but I thought you should know." My mind raced as anger and paranoia threatened to take over. "Why didn't you tell me yesterday?" "Because I was scared," she admitted, tears brimming in her eyes. "I didn't want to ruin the progress we've been making, and I thought if I'd blocked him right away, it wouldn't matter. But it does matter, Jack. You deserve to know, and I'm sorry I hesitated." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. Part of me wanted to explode, to accuse her of keeping secrets again. But another part of me, the part that had been fighting to rebuild this relationship, noticed something different this time. She hadn't hidden the truth indefinitely. She'd come to me on her own, even though she knew it could lead to another argument. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally, my voice low but steady. Her eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to say that. "You're not mad?" "Oh, I'm mad," I said, shaking my head. "But not at you, not this time. I'm mad at him for not letting this go. And I'm mad that we're still dealing with the fallout of all this." She nodded, her expression a mix of relief and guilt. "I'll do whatever you need to feel secure. If you want me to change my number, I will. If you want to talk to him yourself, I won't stop you." "No," I said firmly. "I don't need to talk to him. He's not the problem anymore. The problem is making sure this doesn't keep happening. Rachel nodded again, her resolve clear. I'll do whatever it takes, Jack. I mean it. That night, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought about everything Rachel had said, about how she'd come clean about Kyle's message instead of hiding it. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. For the first time, I started to believe that maybe she really did understand the depth of the damage she'd caused, and maybe she was finally ready to do the work to fix it. In therapy, we brought up the incident with Kyle, and Dr. Ellis helped us unpack it. Rachel, she said, it's a good sign that you came forward with the truth, even though it was difficult. That shows growth. But trust is still fragile, and moments like this are critical in the rebuilding process. Jack, how did her honesty make you feel? I thought for a moment before answering. It caught me off guard, I admitted. Part of me was waiting for her to mess up again. But when she told me, I realized I didn't feel the same kind of anger I used to. It felt more like cautious relief. That's a significant shift, Dr. Ellis said. It means you're starting to trust her again, even if it's only a little. Rachel wiped away a tear, her voice trembling as she said, I know I can't erase what I did, but I want to prove to Jack that I'm not the same person who made those choices. I just hope I get the chance to show him. You are getting the chance, I said quietly. But you need to understand that it's not just about proving yourself to me. It's about us working together to make sure this never happens again. She nodded, and for the first time in a long time, I saw genuine hope in her eyes. Over the next few weeks, Rachel and I started to rebuild brick by brick. We leaned on the tools Dr. Ellis had given us, practicing open communication and addressing problems as they arose instead of letting them fester. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when I'd catch myself doubting her, when a random thought or memory would drag me back to that first gut-wrenching discovery. But those moments didn't last as long as they used to, and Rachel's patience and consistency helped me work through them. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, she reached over and took my hand. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said softly, but I'm so grateful you're giving me the chance to earn it. I squeezed her hand, feeling a mix of emotions I couldn't fully articulate. It's not about deserving, I said. It's about whether we can move forward. And I think we're starting to figure that out. For the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a glimpse of light at the end of the tunnel. It wasn't a guarantee that we'd make it, but it was enough to keep me trying. It felt like we were piecing together a shattered vase, one fragile fragment at a time. Rachel and I had both accepted that our marriage would never go back to what it was. The trust we'd lost couldn't be replaced. It could only be rebuilt into something different, something stronger, if we were willing to work for it. We started focusing on the little things. For years, our lives had revolved around work, chores, and routines, leaving little room for spontaneity or connection. Now, we were making an effort to change that. One Friday, Rachel surprised me with a home-cooked meal. She'd gone all out, candles on the table, soft music playing in the background, and my favorite dish, chicken parmigiana. What's the occasion? I asked, raising an eyebrow as I sat down. She smiled nervously. No occasion. I just wanted to do something nice for you. As we ate, we talked, not about the affair or the therapy sessions, but about normal things. Movies we wanted to see, places we wanted to visit, even dumb internet memes. For the first time in months, it felt like we were just us. After dinner, we stayed at the table, sipping wine and reminiscing about the early days of our relationship. We laughed about our first date, when I'd accidentally spilled coffee on her, and the time we'd gotten caught in a rainstorm and ended up dancing in the middle of the street. I miss this, she said quietly, her eyes meeting mine. I miss us. Me too, I admitted, surprising myself with how much I meant it. The next step in our rebuilding process was trust-building exercises, something Dr. Ellis had suggested during one of our sessions. They sounded silly at first, activities like sharing personal fears or taking turns planning surprise dates. but they forced us to be vulnerable with each other in ways we hadn't been in years. One of the exercises involved writing down something we'd never told each other before, then sharing it out loud. Rachel went first. She took a deep breath and said, "I've always been scared that I'm not enough for you. That someday, you'll wake up and realize you deserve someone better." Her confession stunned me. I'd spent so much time focused on my own insecurities after the affair that I hadn't considered hers. "Rachel," I said, my voice soft, "I'm not looking for someone better. If I didn't think you were worth fighting for, I wouldn't still be here." Her eyes welled up with tears, and she reached for my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. When it was my turn, I hesitated. Sharing something so personal felt risky, but I knew this was part of the process. "I've always been scared of failing," I admitted. "Failing you, failing our marriage, failing as a husband. That's why I threw myself into work so much. I thought if I could provide for us, it would make up for everything else. But I see now that it didn't." Rachel squeezed my hand. "You didn't fail me, Jack," she said. "We both made mistakes, but you've never stopped trying. That's what matters." It wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still moments when the past would creep in, like a shadow we couldn't fully escape. One night, as we were getting ready for bed, Rachel caught me staring at her phone on the nightstand. "You don't trust me, do you?" she asked, her tone a mix of sadness and understanding. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I want to. But it's hard. Sometimes I look at you and see the person I fell in love with. Other times I see her. The version of you that hurt me." Her face fell, and for a moment I thought I'd gone too far. But then she nodded. "I get it. And I don't expect you to trust me right away. I just hope that, someday, you'll look at me and only see the first version again." "I hope so too," I said quietly. One of the biggest turning points came during a trip to the beach, our first since the affair. We chose a different beach this time, far away from Myrtle, but the memories lingered. As we walked along the shoreline, Rachel slipped her hand into mine. "I've been dreading this," she admitted. "Me too," I said. "But maybe it's time to make new memories." We spent the day doing all the things we'd loved on past trips, building sandcastles, playing in the waves, and sharing a ridiculous amount of ice cream. By the time the sun began to set, I realized something surprising. I wasn't thinking about Kyle anymore. Instead, I was thinking about how much I wanted to move forward, not just for Rachel, but for myself. That night, as we sat on the balcony watching the waves, Rachel leaned her head on my shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For giving me another chance. For believing in me, even when I didn't deserve it." I wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. "It's not about deserving," I said. "It's about what we're willing to fight for. And I'm willing to fight for this, for us." For the first time, it felt like we were truly rebuilding, not just patching over the cracks, but creating something new, something stronger. In the months that followed, Rachel and I continued to rebuild, slowly but steadily. Each day felt like laying another brick in the foundation of our new marriage, stronger, but scarred by the past. One of the biggest changes was how we communicated. Before the affair, we'd been guilty of sweeping problems under the rug, hoping they'd resolve themselves. Now, we tackled everything head-on, even when it was uncomfortable. One evening, we were cleaning up after dinner when Rachel suddenly said, "Jack, I need to ask you something." I turned to her, noticing the nervous way she twisted the dish towel in her hands. "What is it?" She hesitated before saying, "Do you ever think about leaving? I mean, do you ever wonder if you'd be happier without me?" The question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. Finally, I set the dish I was holding onto the counter and turned to face her. "I'd be lying if I said I never thought about it," I admitted. There were days when the pain felt so overwhelming that walking away seemed like the easier option. But then I think about everything we've been through, the good times, the life we've built, and I realize I don't want to throw it all away. Rachel's eyes welled up with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of guilt or shame. They were tears of relief. "I don't want to throw it away there," she said softly. One of the most surprising things about our journey was how it changed us individually, not just as a couple. Rachel started seeing a personal therapist to work through the insecurities and fears that had contributed to her actions. She was learning to communicate her needs more effectively, something she admitted she'd struggled with for years. I also took a hard look at myself. Therapy had forced me to confront my own shortcomings, not just in the marriage, but as a person. I realized how much of my identity had been tied to my role as a provider, how I'd used work as a way to avoid dealing with emotional vulnerability. One day, after one of Rachel's therapy sessions, she came home with a notebook. "What's that?" I asked as she sat down next to me on the couch. "It's something my therapist suggested," she said, flipping through the pages. "A gratitude journal. I've been writing down things I'm grateful for every day. And a lot of them are about you." She handed me the notebook, and as I read through her entries, I felt a lump form in my throat. "I'm grateful that Jack stayed when he had every reason to leave. I'm grateful for the way he makes me laugh, even when things feel impossible. I'm grateful for his patience, his strength, and his heart." I looked up at her, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," I said. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Thank you for giving me a chance to show you how much you mean to me." As time went on, we began creating new traditions, small, meaningful gestures that helped us stay connected. Friday nights became our designated date night, whether it was going out for dinner or simply watching a movie together at home. We also started leaving notes for each other, little messages tucked into lunch bags or stuck to the bathroom mirror. They were simple things like, "Hope you have a great day," or "You make me smile." But they served as constant reminders of the effort we were both putting in. One of the most significant moments came on our wedding anniversary. Rachel planned a surprise trip to the same cabin we'd visited during our first major step toward reconciliation. She didn't tell me where we were going until we arrived, and when I saw the familiar wooden sign marking the driveway, I couldn't help but smile. This place was where I started to believe we could make it, she said as we unpacked the car. "I wanted to come back here to celebrate how far we've come." That weekend, we laughed more than we had in years. We played board games, went on long hikes, and even danced under the stars, the only music coming from the crickets and the wind. On our last night there, as we sat by the fire, Rachel took my hand and said, "I know this doesn't erase the past, but I hope it shows you how much I've learned, and how much I love you." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see the woman who had hurt me. I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman who was fighting just as hard as I was to make this work. "I love you too," I said. And for the first time, I truly meant it without hesitation. Rebuilding our marriage hadn't been easy, and it hadn't been perfect. But as we drove home from the cabin, I realized something important. We weren't just fixing what had been broken. We were creating something new, something stronger. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about our future. The journey to rebuild our marriage taught me something I never expected. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning to live with the scars, embracing the lessons they carry, and choosing to move forward despite the pain. Rachel and I were far from perfect, but we were trying, every single day. The weeks after our anniversary trip felt different. The weight of the past still lingered, but it didn't dominate our lives the way it once had. Instead, we focused on creating new memories, building a future that wasn't defined by what had happened, but by what we were choosing to do now. We started taking walks together every evening, something so simple yet surprisingly meaningful. It became our time to connect, to talk about our day or simply enjoy each other's presence. One evening, as we strolled through the neighborhood, Rachel said, "Do you think we'll ever look back on this time and feel grateful?" I glanced at her, surprised by the question. "Grateful? For what?" "For the wake-up call," she said. "For realizing how much we'd been taking each other for granted. Don't get me wrong, I hate what I did, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But it forced us to confront things we might have ignored forever. I thought about her words as we walked in silence. She wasn't wrong. The affair had been a nightmare, but it had also been a mirror, reflecting the cracks we'd both ignored for far too long. I think we can get there, I said finally. But we'll have to keep earning it. She nodded. I'm okay with that. A few months later, I found myself in a situation I never would have imagined, giving advice to someone else in a similar position. Ethan, my best friend, called me one evening, his voice heavy with worry. Jack, man, I need your help, he said. I think my wife might be hiding something. She's been distant lately, and I don't know if I'm just being paranoid or if something's really wrong. The irony wasn't lost on me. A year ago, I wouldn't have had the faintest idea what to say. But now, I felt like I'd earned some hard-won wisdom. Have you talked to her about it? I asked. Not really, Ethan admitted. I'm scared of what she might say. Then you've already learned the first lesson, I said. You have to face the truth, no matter how scary it is. Pretending everything's fine doesn't work, not in the long run. And if the truth is something I don't want to hear? He asked. Then you have to decide if it's something you're willing to fight through, I said. It won't be easy. It won't be quick. But if you both want to fix things, it's possible. Ethan was quiet for a moment before saying, How did you do it, Jack? How did you decide to stay? I took a deep breath, my mind flashing back to the months of therapy, the long nights on the couch, and the endless conversations with Rachel. I asked myself one question. I said, do I still love her enough to try? And when the answer was yes, I knew I had to give it everything I had. But it's not just about love, Ethan. It's about commitment, on both sides. If she's not willing to do the work, then it's not worth it. Thanks, man, Ethan said. I appreciate it. Anytime, I replied, realizing just how far I'd come since the day my own world had fallen apart. Rachel and I still had hard days, moments when the memories would resurface, when the shadows of the past threatened to pull us back. But those moments were fewer and farther between. One night, as we were sitting on the couch watching TV, Rachel leaned her head on my shoulder and said, Do you think we made it? I thought about her question, about everything we'd been through and everything we still had ahead of us. I think we're still making it, I said. But yeah, I think we're getting there. She smiled, her fingers lacing through mine. Looking back, I wouldn't wish what we went through on anyone. The pain, the betrayal, the uncertainty, it was the hardest thing I've ever faced. But it also taught me what it means to truly fight for something you believe in, to rebuild not just a marriage but a partnership, brick by brick. If I could give advice to anyone going through something similar, it would be this: healing takes time. It takes honesty, vulnerability, and an incredible amount of patience. It's not easy, and it's not guaranteed. But if both people are willing to put in the work, it is possible. Rachel and I aren't perfect. We never will be. But we're better now, better partners, better communicators, better people. And that's enough for me.